What happens when the man who promised to protect you becomes the architect of your destruction? For Clara Hayes, her fairy tale life shattered the moment the courtroom doors slammed shut. She was pregnant, innocent, and sentenced to prison for a crime she didn't commit. The accuser. Her billionaire husband, Damien Blackwood, convinced she had stolen a priceless heirloom. But the real thief was hiding in plain sight, a venomous mistress who framed her perfectly. This is the story of a devastating betrayal, a mother's fight for survival, and a husband's confession that came far, far too late. The penthouse apartment felt less like a home and more like a pristine museum exhibit floating above the New York City skyline. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine. Every piece of art was worth more than the average person's lifetime earnings, and every window offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the world below. This was Clara Hayes's life, now a life she had stepped into when she married Damien Blackwood, the technology billionaire whose name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless success. At 28, Clara, a talented architect with a spirit far gentler than the cutthroat world she now inhabited, often felt like another beautiful acquisition. She loved Damien, or at least she loved the man she saw in their quiet moments, the man who would trace the curve of her growing belly with a look of genuine wonder, whispering plans for their son. But that man was often eclipsed by the titan of industry, the Damien Blackwood who commanded boardrooms and whose time was measured in millions of dollars per minute. His most trusted lieutenant in all things was Isabella Ritchie. She was his executive assistant, but the title was a gross understatement. Isabella was Damien's shadow, his gatekeeper, his external hard drive. She was sleek, intelligent, and possessed an ambition that burned with the intensity of a blue flame. She had been with Damien for years, long before Clara, and she made no secret of her belief that she understood him in ways a wife never could. Clara's unease around Isabella was a constant low-grade hum. It was in the way Isabella would enter their private residence without knocking a file in hand, her eyes flicking over Clara with a dismissive coolness. It was in the inside jokes she shared with Damien, references to deals and trips that predated Clara's existence. Clara told herself it was her own insecurity, the lingering ghost of her middle-class upbringing, rattling around in this palace of glass and steel. The source of the impending storm, though she didn't know it yet, was locked away in Damien's private safe. It was a necklace known as the Star of Astoria, a staggering deep blue sapphire the size of a robin's egg, suspended in a web of antique platinum and diamonds. It had belonged to his mother, a woman Damien spoke of with a reverence that bordered on worship. One evening a few weeks before the annual Blackwood Foundation charity gala, which was to be held at their penthouse, Damien opened the safe. "I want you to wear it for the gala," he said, his voice soft as he lifted the heavy jewel from its velvet bed. Clara gasped. The necklace was cold and heavy in her palm, radiating a history and value that was terrifying. "Damien, I can't. It's a legend. What if something happens to it?" "Nothing will happen to it," he said, his confidence absolute. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin. In the mirror, the sapphire seemed to swallow the light in the room. Its blue depths a stark contrast to her simple white dress and the warm glow of her pregnancy. "It belongs on you now. You are the lady of this house." Isabella, entering with a schedule update, paused at the doorway. Her eyes locked onto the necklace, and for a fleeting second, Clara saw something raw and unguarded in her gaze, a flash of pure, unadulterated envy. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a tight, professional smile. "Stunning Clara Isabella," said her voice, smooth as silk. "A queen's jewel. You'll be the talk of the gala." The night of the gala was a dizzying blur of camera flashes, champagne flutes, and the hollow laughter of the city's elite. Clara, feeling large and clumsy in her bespoke maternity gown, wore the star of Astoria with a paralyzing sense of dread. She felt the weight of it, not just as a jewel, but as a symbol of Damien's trust. She took it off the moment they were alone, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it back to him. "It was beautiful, but I'm terrified of it," she confessed with a nervous laugh. Damien smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that made her heart ache. "You were the beautiful one." He placed the necklace back in its case, spun the dial on the safe, and patted the steel door. Safe and sound. 2 days later, the world ended. It began with a frantic search. A potential buyer a sheikh Damien had been courting for a new international venture was in town, and had expressed interest in seeing the famous sapphire. It was a power play, a display of legacy. Damien, wanting to close the deal, went to the safe. He came out moments later, his face pale, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Clara." "Where is it?" "Where is what?" she asked, looking up from the nursery blueprints she was reviewing. "Don't play games." "The necklace. The Star of Astoria. It's not in the safe." A cold fear, sharp and immediate, pierced through her. "What? That's impossible. You put it back. I saw you." They searched the study together, a frantic, useless exercise. It wasn't there. Damien's controlled panic was escalating into something uglier. That's when Isabella appeared, her expression a perfect mask of concern. "Damien? What's wrong?" she asked, rushing to his side. "The necklace is gone," he bit out, running a hand through his hair. "It's been stolen." Isabella's eyes widened. She put a comforting hand on his arm, a gesture of familiarity that grated on Clara's nerves. "Stolen, but how?" "The security here is—" She trailed off. Then her eyes shifted as if a sudden, terrible thought had occurred to her. "Oh, Damien." "No." "What is it?" he demanded. "It's probably nothing," Isabella said, hesitating for dramatic effect. "But the other day, I was looking for a swatch book in Clara's studio. I saw a box. I didn't think anything of it, but—" She didn't need to finish. The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Damien's gaze swung to Clara, his eyes hardening with a suspicion that was like a physical blow. "My studio." Clara was bewildered. "What are you talking about?" Without another word. Damien strode down the hall to the small, sunlit room Clara used for her architectural work. She followed her heart, hammering against her ribs. Isabella trailed behind them, a silent, watchful presence. Damien tore through the room, his usual precision gone replaced by a desperate fury. He ripped open closets' drawers, portfolio cases, and then tucked away in a shoebox on the top shelf of a closet where she kept old sketches he found it. He pulled out a necklace. For a split second, relief washed over Clara until she saw it properly. It was a crude imitation. The sapphire was glass, the diamonds were chips of zirconia, and the platinum was cheap plated metal. It was a gaudy, worthless replica of the Star of Astoria. Damien held it up. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. "What is this, Clara?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I've never seen that before in my life," she stammered, her mind reeling. How did it get there? Who-would her eyes shot to Isabella. Isabella met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no mask. There was only triumph. You planned to replace it, Damien said, his voice flat with dawning horror and conviction. You took the real one and left this piece of trash, hoping I wouldn't notice for months, years even. No, Damien. Listen to me, Clara pleaded, taking a step toward him. I would never. Someone put that there. It was her. She pointed a shaking finger at Isabella. Isabella flinched back, a masterful performance of being wounded. Me? Clara, why would you say that? I'm just trying to help. She's always been jealous. She wants what we have. Clara's voice was rising, becoming hysterical, and she knew, even as the words tumbled out, that it was making her look guiltier. Damien's face was like stone. The love, the trust. The man who had looked at their unborn child with such wonder. It was all gone. In his place stood a judge, a jury, and an executioner, all convinced of her guilt. He saw his wife, the woman from a modest background, pregnant, and perhaps he now reasoned desperate to secure a future for herself in case things went wrong. He saw the worthless replica and the priceless original that was missing. He saw a betrayal of his mother's memory. I don't know who you are anymore, he said, his voice cracking with the agony of his own conclusion. He turned to Isabella. Call the police. The arrival of the New York Police Department detectives turned the surreal nightmare into a cold procedural reality. The penthouse, once a symbol of Clara's elevated life, became a crime scene. Men in somber suits spoke in low, serious tones, their presence a violation of the home's sterile perfection. Clara sat on a plush sofa, a cashmere throw clutched in her hands, feeling as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. Damien was a storm of controlled fury and wounded pride. He presented the narrative Isabella had so expertly crafted. He spoke of the necklace's immense sentimental value, his decision to let Clara wear it, and the shocking discovery of the replica in her personal studio. Every word was a nail in her coffin. Mr. Blackwood, did your wife have any financial troubles before you were married? One of the detectives, a man named Miller with weary eyes, asked. Before Damien could answer, Isabella interjected softly. Forgive me for speaking out of turn, detective, but I handle some of Damien's personal financial integrations. There were some significant student loans and a bit of credit card debt. Nothing unmanageable, of course, but... She let the sentence hang, pregnant with insinuation. Lies. Clara shot to her feet. My student loans were nearly paid off. I had no debt. Damien. Tell them. Damien wouldn't look at her. He simply gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the detective. There were some debts, he confirmed, his voice gravelly. I took care of them when we married. It was a truth twisted into a weapon. Yes, he had insisted on clearing her modest loans, a grand gesture of his wealth. But now, in this context, it painted her as a charity case, a woman with a history of needing money, a woman who might be tempted by a multi-million-dollar sapphire. The detectives questioned Clara. Her denials were passionate, her accusations against Isabella fervent. But to their trained, cynical ears, she sounded like every other cornered suspect. Her story was wild, a manipulative assistant framing the boss's wife out of jealousy. The alternative, a pregnant wife swapping a priceless heirloom for a fake, seemed simpler, more tangible. They had the replica found in her possession. They had a motive, however twisted. They had the word of Damien Blackwood. She was arrested. The quiet click of the handcuffs around her wrists was the loudest sound she had ever heard. They led her from her home past the priceless art and the panoramic views, her mind numb with disbelief. The final devastating blow was the look on Damien's face as she was escorted out. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, soul-deep disappointment. He truly believed she had done it. The media descended like vultures. The story was irresistible. Blackwood's bride, a burglar. Billionaire's pregnant wife, charged in jewel heist. Her face was plastered everywhere, a grainy, unflattering photo from a college event. The narrative was set. She was a gold digger who got too greedy. Her only lifeline was her best friend, Chloe, a fiercely loyal elementary school teacher who stormed into the precinct like a hurricane. "This is insane, Clara. We're going to fight this. We'll get the best lawyer in the city," Chloe vowed, her hands gripping the bars of the holding cell. But Damien Blackwood had already retained the best lawyers for the prosecution. He was determined to see justice served for the desecration of his mother's memory. He spared no expense building a formidable legal wall that Clara, with her limited resources, could never hope to breach. Her court-appointed lawyer was competent, but overworked, facing a team of legal assassins funded by a billionaire's righteous fury. The trial was a public crucifixion. On the stand, Damien was a figure of tragic nobility. He spoke of his love for his mother, the significance of the necklace, and the ultimate betrayal by the woman he had trusted with his heart and home. His testimony was devastating, his pain palpable to the jury. Isabella's performance was even more brilliant. She played the role of the reluctant witness, the loyal employee forced to reveal a painful truth. She recounted finding the replica with feigned tears, her voice breaking, as she described Damien's heartbreak. She painted a picture of Clara as being secretive, often complaining about being financially dependent, and expressing a casual envy of the Blackwood family's legacy. They were small, insidious lies, impossible to disprove, and powerful in their cumulative effect. When Clara took the stand, her own story sounded flimsy and desperate in comparison. Her voice shook with a mixture of terror and rage. She tried to explain Isabella's campaign of subtle sabotage, the looks, the comments, the constant undermining. But without proof, her words sounded like the paranoid ramblings of a guilty woman trying to deflect blame. Mrs. Blackwood, the prosecuting attorney, said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you asking this jury to believe that Mr. Ricci, a trusted employee of 10 years, orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy, risked her entire career, and planted a fake necklace in your closet, all because she was... what? A little jealous? Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking." Clara insisted, her eyes pleading with the impassive faces of the jury. The prosecutor just smiled sadly, as if pitying her delusion. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty. The judge's voice seemed to come from a great distance as he read the sentence. 5 to 7 years in the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for women. A strangled sob escaped Clara's throat. Her eyes flew to Damien. She searched his face for any flicker of doubt, any hint of the man she loved. She found nothing but a mask of cold, resolute duty. He had to believe this. To admit even the possibility of her innocence would be to admit his own monstrous failure, his gullibility, his catastrophic lack of judgment. It was easier to brand her a criminal than to face his own role in the tragedy. As the court officers led her away, she pressed a hand to her swollen belly. This was no longer just about her. They were sending her child to prison with her. She looked back one last time at the man who had been her husband, her partner, the father of her baby. He turned away, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. The love story was over. The real sentence was just beginning. The transition from a penthouse in the sky to a 6-by-9-foot concrete cell was a brutal, soul-crushing amputation of self. Bedford Hills Correctional Facility was a world of grey concrete, clanging steel doors, and the pervasive scent of industrial cleaner, failing to mask the underlying odour of despair. The first few weeks were a blur of humiliating procedures, ill-fitting uniforms, and the constant oppressive noise of the institution. Clara's pregnancy, once a source of joy and anticipation, became her greatest vulnerability, and her only reason to survive. She was terrified. Every meal, every step, every interaction was filtered through the primal need to protect the life growing inside her. The other inmates regarded her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was the billionaire's wife, a fallen princess whose story had been tabloid fodder. To them, she was a tourist in their world of generational poverty and systemic failure. Her salvation came in the unlikely form of Maria, a woman in her late 40s, serving a long sentence for armed robbery. Maria was tough with eyes that had seen everything, and a network of alliances that made her a quiet power on the cell block. She saw the raw terror in Clara's eyes, the hand that instinctively cradled her belly, and took her under her wing. "Stop looking so scared," Maria told her one day in the mess hall, her voice a low rasp. "Fear is blood in the water here. You're a mother now. Act like it." Maria taught her the unwritten rules, which guards to avoid how to trade. For who? For better food. How to make herself invisible. She taught Clara that survival in prison wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the smartest and seeing the angles no one else did. For the first time since her arrest, Clara felt a flicker of agency. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Damien Blackwood was trying to erase her. He had Isabella orchestrate a quiet, swift divorce. He poured himself into his work with a renewed ferocity, launching new products and closing billion-dollar deals. He and Isabella were now a public power couple, her presence at his side, a constant fixture in financial news. She had moved into the penthouse, her clothes now filling the closet that had once been Clara's. She had everything she had ever wanted, but the victory felt strangely hollow to Damien. The penthouse was colder, the silence heavier. At night, he'd find himself walking past the sealed nursery, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Isabella would gently guide him away, her touch smooth and reassuring. "Don't torture yourself, darling," she'd murmur. "She wasn't the person you thought she was." He clung to those words like a mantra, a shield against the creeping tendrils of doubt. 7 months into her sentence, Clara went into labor. The experience was a primitive agony, a world away from the sanitized birthing suite she and Damien had planned. The prison infirmary was stark and cold, the staff indifferent. Maria stood guard outside the door, ensuring no one bothered her. Through the haze of pain, Clara focused on one thing, her son. Leo Hayes was born small but healthy, his first cries echoing in the sterile room. Holding him for the first time, Clara felt a love so fierce it eclipsed all the pain, all the injustice. His tiny fingers curled around hers. And in that moment, he was the only thing in the world that was real and true. The cruelty of her situation became starkly clear. She was allowed to keep him with her in the prison's nursery unit for only a short time. Every day was a precious, stolen gift. She memorized the shape of his ears, the scent of his skin, the way his eyes, so much like Damien's, blinked slowly in the dim light. The day she had to hand him over to Chloe was the day her heart truly broke. Chloe stood on the other side of a sterile visitation room divider, her face a mask of grief. "I'll take care of him, Clara. I swear it," Chloe sobbed, reaching for the baby. "I'll bring him to visit every week. He will know who his mother is." Giving Leo to her friend felt like tearing off a limb. As she watched them walk away, a part of Clara died. The fight went out of her, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. She was just a number now, a ghost haunting a concrete box. Chloe was true to her word. She created a private social media page, accessible only to a few trusted family members, where she posted photos and updates about Leo. It was a way for Clara to watch her son grow from afar, through smuggled printouts that Maria would get for her. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, Damien found himself sleeplessly scrolling through a business contact's feed. A shared post caught his eye. It was from Chloe. He remembered her as Clara's fiery, loyal friend. The post was public, a rare slip-up on Chloe's part. It was a picture of a baby boy sitting in a high chair, a smear of sweet potato on his cheek. His eyes, those eyes laughing at the camera. The caption read, "My beautiful godson Leo, 1-year-old today. Your mama loves you more than all the stars in the sky, and she will be home soon." Damien froze. He zoomed in on the photo. The boy had his jawline, his dark hair, and the exact same shape of his eyes. This was his son, a son he had abandoned, a son who was growing up without a father whose mother was in prison because of him. He saw the comments below the post. One read, "He looks just like his mother, so strong." Another, "That Blackwood monster doesn't deserve to even know this angel exists." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Monster. For the first time, the carefully constructed walls of his certainty began to crumble. He looked at the laughing baby in the photo and felt not the satisfaction of justice served, but a cold, creeping dread. The dread that he had been catastrophically wrong. The image of Leo laughing in his high chair became seared into Damien's mind. It haunted his days and invaded his dreams. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the boy's eyes staring back at him. The word monster echoed in the silence of the penthouse. His impenetrable certainty had been the foundation of his actions. He had known Clara was guilty. He'd seen the evidence, heard the testimony, but the photo of his son chipped away at that foundation until hairline fractures of doubt spread through everything. What if he had been wrong? The magnitude of that possibility was so immense, so terrifying that he could barely breathe. He began his own quiet, obsessive investigation operating in the shadows of his own life. He couldn't alert Isabella. His suspicion was still just a phantom, and he knew she was too smart, too embedded in his life to risk tipping her off. He had to unravel the story himself, thread by painful thread. His first step was to revisit the narrative that had convicted Clara, her supposed financial desperation. He had blindly accepted Isabella's summary of Clara's significant debts. Now he bypassed his own company's accountants and hired an outside forensic accounting firm, giving them a simple directive. Find everything you can about Clara Hayes's finances for the 5 years prior to our marriage. While he waited for their report, he turned his attention to the penthouse security systems. He better than anyone knew their capabilities. He spent hours reviewing footage from the days surrounding the theft. On the surface, nothing was amiss. But Damien wasn't looking at the surface. He was looking for what wasn't there. He analyzed entry logs, motion sensor activity, and network access points. He found it late one night in the server room, a 5-minute data gap in the security log for the hallway leading to Clara's studio. It occurred at 2:17 a.m., 3 days before the necklace was reported missing. To any normal security review, it would look like a minor system glitch, a momentary reboot. But Damien knew his own system. It didn't glitch. A gap like that had to be manually created by someone with the highest level admin privileges. Only 2 people had that access, him and Isabella. A cold sweat broke out on his skin. He remembered being on a conference call with Tokyo that night. He had been in his office for hours. The report from the forensic accountants arrived the next day. It was a thin folder. The summary was stark. Clara Hayes had been the model of financial responsibility. She had 2 outstanding student loans, which she was paying down ahead of schedule through disciplined automated payments. Her credit card had a 0 balance. She had a modest but growing savings account. There was no desperation. There was no significant debt. There was only a woman carefully building a life for herself. Isabella's claims at the trial had been a complete fabrication, a lie, a deliberate, calculated lie. Damien felt the floor drop out from under him. He had built his empire on data, on facts, on seeing through deception, and he had been played for a fool by the person he trusted most. The image of Clara on the witness stand, her face streaked with tears, her voice raw as she pleaded with him to believe her, flashed in his mind. He had turned away. His focus narrowed to the replica necklace. In the storm of the investigation and trial, no one had bothered to trace its origin. It had simply been Exhibit A, the proof of Clara's deceit. Now it was the key. Using a proxy, he had the evidence file from the NYPD discreetly pulled for re-evaluation. He hired a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Ari, whose specialty was tracing the untraceable. As Damien delved deeper, Isabella sensed the shift. He was distant, preoccupied. The easy intimacy they had cultivated since Clara's imprisonment had evaporated, replaced by a polite, formal chill. "Is everything all right, Damien?" she asked one evening, placing a hand on his shoulder as he stared out at the city lights. "You seem so far away." He forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind, with the new merger. Long days." She accepted the lie, but her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, were watchful. She began to subtly reassert her control, anticipating his needs, managing his schedule with even more ruthless efficiency, leaving him no room to breathe, no room to think. She was reminding him of how indispensable she was. But it was too late. He was already pulling at the thread. Ari the investigator called a week later. "The replica is high-quality theatrical work," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Not something you buy off the street. The materials are specific. I tracked the zirconia chips to a supplier who sells exclusively to a handful of artisans in the tri-state area. One of them is a man named Antoine Dubois, operating out of a small studio in Brooklyn. Specializes in period pieces for film and private commissions. He's a cash-only artist. No paper trail. Get me a meeting," Damien ordered, his heart pounding. 2 days later, Damien was sitting in a cluttered, dusty workshop that smelled of metal and polish. Antoine Dubois was a small, nervous man with ink-stained fingers. He was terrified of Damien Blackwood, But Ari's methods had been very persuasive. "I don't want trouble," Antoine stammered. "You won't have any provided you tell me the truth." Damien said, his voice calm and cold. "A little over a year and a half ago, you made a replica of this necklace." He slid a high-resolution photo of the Star of Astoria across the table. Antoine paled, nodding slowly. "Yes. I remember. A very specific job. The client was particular. Describe her." "I never saw her face clearly. She wore a large hat, sunglasses. Always. Paid in cash. But..." He paused, trying to recall the details. "She smelled of something. A perfume. Very distinctive. Tuberose, I think. And she wore a ring on her right index finger. A silver snake eating its own tail." Damien's blood ran cold. The Boros ring. Isabella had worn it every day for the past decade. It was a gift from her first mentor. She never took it off. He had her. The thread had been unraveled. Now all that was left to do was to watch the entire tapestry of lies come undone. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur. The confirmation of Isabella's guilt didn't bring Damien relief, only a sickening, hollow certainty. He wasn't just a fool, he was an accessory. His arrogance and his wounded pride had been the weapons Isabella used to destroy Clara. He had handed them to her willingly. He spent the next 48 hours constructing a trap. He moved with the cold, predatory precision he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. He had Ari install discreet, high-fidelity audio and video recorders in his study, the same room where Clara's life had been dismantled. He instructed his legal team to prepare 2 sets of documents. One a severance package for Isabella of unprecedented generosity, and the other a comprehensive file detailing the evidence against her to be delivered to the district attorney's office. The final piece of his plan was the bait. He called Isabella into the study on a Friday evening. "Close the door," he said, his tone casual. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." She entered, smiling, the ever-efficient partner, ready to solve a problem. She was wearing the Ouroboros ring. The faint floral scent of tuberose perfume trailed behind her. "I've received an extraordinary offer for another one of my mother's pieces." He began gesturing to a velvet box on his desk. "This emerald suite. The offer is almost too good to be true. Before I proceed, I need to have it independently verified and a replica made for the insurance records. The process is a bit unorthodox. It requires absolute discretion." He watched her face. For a fraction of a second, her professional mask slipped. A flicker of avarice of calculation crossed her features before being smoothed away. "Of course," she said. "I can handle that for you. I know just the person. Discreet works off book." "Excellent," Damien said, leaning back in his chair. "Cash only, I assume." "Like Antoine Dubois." The name hit her like a physical shock. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. I don't know who that is." "Don't you?" Damien's voice dropped, losing all its warmth. "He's an artisan in Brooklyn. He remembers you. He remembers the hat, the sunglasses. He remembers the smell of tuberose." Damien leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers, "and he remembers the ring." Isabella instinctively tucked her right hand behind her back. "This is ridiculous." "Damien, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a 5-minute data gap in my security logs. I'm talking about a forensic accounting report that shows Clara had no debt. I'm talking about perjury, Isabella. I'm talking about fabricating evidence. I'm talking about you sending an innocent pregnant woman to prison." She stared at him, her mind racing, searching for an escape route. She tried tears first. "Damien, how can you even think this? After everything I've done for you, for this company." She twisted your mind against me. She was always jealous of our relationship. "Stop," he commanded, his voice like cracking ice. "The performance is over. The cameras are rolling." He gestured to a nearly invisible lens in a bookshelf. Her tears vanished, replaced by a cold fury. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered, revealing the years of bitterness and resentment beneath. "You want a confession?" She hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Fine. Yes, I did it. Every last bit of it." She stood up, pacing the room like a chained animal, her confession pouring out in a torrent of rage. "I gave you 10 years of my life. I was there for every deal, every crisis, every all-nighter. I built this empire with you. I was your partner in everything but name. And what was my reward? To stand by and watch you give it all away to some doe-eyed little architect who didn't have a clue what it meant to be a Blackwood." Her voice dripped with contempt. She was weak. She didn't deserve you. She didn't deserve this life. I deserved it. I earned it. "The necklace," Damien asked, his voice hollow. "Pathetically easy," she scoffed. "I had the replica made weeks in advance, swapped them out the night of the gala when you were both distracted. I knew your security protocols better than your own guards. Planting it in her studio was child's play. And you were so blinded by your precious mother's memory and your own arrogance you believed every word. You wanted to believe it. It was easier than admitting you'd married beneath you." The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She had seen his weakness, his pride, and used it as a lever to orchestrate the entire tragedy. "Where is the real one?" he demanded. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It's my severance package, my retirement plan, hidden away where you'll never find it." Damien didn't move. He just stared at the woman he thought he knew, a stranger filled with a poison he had never seen. "You won't need a retirement plan where you're going, Isabella." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Frank, please come in, and bring the gentleman with you." The study door opened. 2 NYPD detectives, the same Detective Miller from the initial investigation, and his partner stepped inside. Miller's face was grim. He had read the file Damien's lawyers had prepared. Isabella's face went white with genuine shock. She looked from the detectives to Damien, a final desperate plea in her eyes. Damien met her gaze, his own expression devoid of any emotion, but a vast, empty regret. "It's over." As they read Isabella her rights and cuffed her, the full crushing weight of his failure descended upon him. This confession wasn't a victory. It was a testament to his own monumental blindness. He hadn't just been wrong. He had been a monster. And his confession, the one that truly mattered, was still to come. And it would be far, far too late. The arrest of Isabella Ricci ignited a media firestorm that dwarfed the original scandal. The headlines were brutal Blackwood's empire of lies. Mistress admits to framing pregnant wife. In the new narrative, Damien was no longer the tragic wronged husband. He was recast as a gullible fool, at best a cruel accomplice at worst. Blackwood Industries' stock price plummeted as the market reacted to the instability and moral rot at the company's core. For Damien, the public humiliation was nothing compared to the private agony. He was haunted by the knowledge that every clang of a prison door, every lonely night Clara had spent in a cell, every terrified moment of her prison birth was his fault. He had not only allowed it to happen, he had powered it with his wealth and his rage. His lawyers, a new team specializing in wrongful convictions, moved swiftly. With Isabella's full confession, the evidence of her conspiracy, and Damien's own sworn affidavit admitting his catastrophic error, the legal path to exonerating Clara was clear, though fraught with bureaucratic inertia. In Bedford Hills, the news arrived on a smuggled copy of the New York Post that Maria slid under Clara's cell door. Clara stared at the headline, at the picture of Isabella in handcuffs, her face a mask of defiant fury. She felt nothing. There was no surge of triumphant joy, no satisfying thirst for vengeance quenched. There was only a profound, hollow exhaustion, as if she had been holding her breath for 2 years and could finally let it go. Freedom was coming. But what did freedom even mean anymore? It couldn't give her back her son's first words, his first steps. It couldn't erase the memory of giving birth on a cold infirmary table or the phantom weight of handcuffs on her wrists. The truth had come out, but it was a truth scarred and damaged, arriving long after the lie had done its work. Damien, desperate and broken, attempted to visit her. He needed to see her, to apologize, to beg for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. The request came back, stamped with a single damning word: refused. Days later, the final orders came through. Clara Hayes was officially exonerated of all charges. Her conviction was vacated. She was a free woman. The release process was quiet and surreal. She walked through the same gates she had entered 2 years prior, trading her grey prison uniform for simple clothes Chloe had brought her. The world seemed too loud, too bright, too fast. As she stepped into the sunlight, she saw a media circus held back by barricades. And she saw him. Damien was standing by a black town car, looking gaunt and older. His eyes, desperate and pleading, found hers across the pavement. He took a hesitant step toward her, but Chloe moved between them, a fierce and protective barrier. "Not today, Damien," Chloe said, her voice trembling with rage. "Not ever, if I have my way." Clara didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed on Chloe's car, on the child seat in the back. She got in without a word, and Chloe drove away, leaving Damien standing alone on the pavement, a ghost at a reunion he was not invited to. Their first stop was Chloe's small, warm apartment in Queens. The moment Clara walked through the door, a small boy with dark, curly hair and familiar eyes toddled toward them, looking at her with a stranger's curiosity. "Leo, Chloe," whispered her voice, thick with tears. "Mama's home." Clara sank to her knees, her arms outstretched. Leo hesitated, glancing back at Chloe, his anchor for reassurance. Clara's heart broke and swelled at the same time. She was a stranger to her own son. She didn't rush him. She just waited, her face wet with silent tears. Finally, driven by a toddler's curiosity, Leo took a few wobbly steps forward and placed a tiny hand on her cheek. "Mama," he whispered, testing the word. "Yes, baby," Clara sobbed, pulling him into a gentle embrace, breathing in the sweet scent of her child for the first time as a free woman. "Mama's here." She held him, rocking back and forth on the floor of her friend's apartment, the gaping wounds of the last 2 years beginning finally to feel the first touch of healing. She was free. She had her son. But the reckoning was yet to come. Life after prison was a fragile, disorienting piece. Clara and Leo moved into a quiet brownstone in Brooklyn, paid for by a victim's compensation fund the state had awarded her. Every day was a process of rediscovery. She learned the rhythm of her son's life, his favorite books, his hatred of peas, the way he giggled when she tickled him. She was rebuilding her life from the ashes, but the ghosts of her past were never far. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, the metallic clang of a cell door echoing in her ears. Damien, true to his word, began his campaign of atonement. It started with a formal offer delivered by his lawyers, a settlement of $50 million, the penthouse, any property she desired, and a public apology he would read from the steps of his company headquarters. Clara's response was swift. She sent back the legal documents with a single sentence written across the front in red ink. "My life is not for sale." She knew, however, that she couldn't cut him out completely. He was Leo's father. For the sake of her son, she finally agreed to meet him. Not in a lawyer's office or a fancy restaurant, but on neutral ground, a quiet bench in Prospect Park. He arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a shell of a man consumed by a guilt that was etched into every line on his face. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm not here for you, Damien." She cut him off, her voice steady and devoid of the fire he'd expected. It was colder and far more devastating. "I'm here for my son. He will one day ask about his father, and I need to be able to tell him that I gave his father a chance to explain why he sent his mother to prison." The words, delivered so calmly, struck him harder than any slap. "There is no explanation," he whispered, his eyes on the ground. "Only a confession. I was arrogant. I was proud. When I thought you betrayed me, betrayed my mother's memory, my grief and my ego made me blind. Isabella showed me what I wanted to see, and I was too much of a coward to look any deeper. I failed you. In every way, a man can fail a woman. I am so sorry." She listened, her expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't give me back the 2 years I lost. It doesn't give Leo back his mother for the first year of his life." "You talk about your mother's memory, Damien. What about the memory you created for your own son?" "His first memories of his mother are in a prison visitation room. That's your legacy." Tears streamed down his face, hot and shameful. "I know. God, I know. What can I do? Tell me what to do." "You want to atone?" she asked, finally looking at him. "Then be a father. That's all. You can see Leo on Saturdays. You will pay for his education. You will never, ever speak ill of me to him. You will answer his questions honestly when he is old enough to ask them. You will live with what you've done every single day, just like I have to. That is your penance." He nodded, accepting her terms as if they were a lifeline. And as he asked the question, a faint, hopeful whisper. Clara gave a sad, weary shake of her head. "There is no us. You can't rebuild a home after you've burned it to the ground. I loved you, Damien, but the man I loved wouldn't have let this happen. Isabella was just a snake. But you opened the door and let her in. You held me down while she bit." She stood up, her time with him concluded. "Goodbye, Damien." She walked away, leaving him alone on the park bench, a billionaire with all the money in the world and nothing left to buy. The final scene of the story isn't one of revenge, but of quiet resilience. Months later, Clara stands in a small, bright office, a blueprint for a community library, spread out on her desk. She has started her own small architectural firm, focusing on public projects. Leo plays with blocks on the floor nearby. Her life is not gilded anymore. It is real, built with her own 2 hands. She is a survivor, her strength forged in fire. Damien fulfills his role, a weekend father, living in a silent penthouse haunted by ghosts. Isabella received a lengthy prison sentence, and the star of Astoria, recovered from a Swiss vault, now sits in the darkness of a museum archive, a tainted symbol of a love and a trust that were shattered beyond repair. Clara Hayes had lost a fortune, but in the end, she had reclaimed something far more valuable herself. Clara's story is a harrowing reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we love the most. She lost everything, but she never lost herself. Her fight for the truth and her journey to reclaim her life and her son is a testament to the strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and share it with someone you know. These stories of injustice and survival deserve to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama. What did you think of Damien's choice? Let us know in the comments below. The air at the Sterling-Rossi wedding tasted of money, old new, and oceans of it. Lilies imported from Dutch glasshouses fought a losing battle against the cloying scent of 1,000 competing perfumes. Isabella Rossi, 7 months pregnant and radiant, in a gown that cost more than a suburban house, felt a single cold drop of sweat trace its way down her spine. Her fiancé, Richard Sterling, the man who was supposed to be waiting for her at the end of the aisle, was missing. And in the pit of her stomach, where their child kicked softly, a primal instinct screamed that this was no simple case of cold feet. She was about to discover a betrayal so profound it would not only shatter her heart, but threaten to bring 2 corporate empires crashing to the ground. The union of Isabella Rossi and Richard Sterling was less a romance and more a coronation. It was the merger of 2 dynasties, a meticulously planned corporate maneuver, wrapped in the fairy tale trappings of a high society wedding. The Rossis, with Isabella at the helm of their marketing division, commanded a global luxury goods empire. Rossi lifestyle, built on Italian craftsmanship and timeless elegance. The Sterlings, a colder, sharper dynasty of American finance, were led by Richard's formidable mother, Victoria Sterling. Their firm, Sterling Holdings, had its tendrils in every corner of the global market. The marriage was the final seal on a multi-billion-dollar merger agreement, a pact that would create a conglomerate of unparalleled power, Sterling Rossi Global. To the outside world, Isabella and Richard were the perfect couple. She was the warm, creative heart. He was the charming, ambitious face of new money. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of paparazzi flashes, charity galas, and weekend trips to Monaco on the Sterling private jet. Richard had courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that left gossip columnists breathless. He'd once filled her Milan apartment with 1,000 white orchids, her favorite simply because she'd had a stressful week. He'd written her name in the sky over the Hamptons. He was attentive, devoted, and seemed utterly captivated by her. But a gilded cage is still a cage. Isabella's brother, Leo Rossi, never trusted him. Leo, 2 years her senior, was the stoic, watchful CEO of the Rossi empire. He had the soul of an old-world craftsman and the mind of a shark. "He performs for you, Bella." He'd told her a month before the wedding, his voice low and serious, over a glass of Barolo in his study. "No one is that perfect. He's playing a role, and you need to figure out what his script is." Isabella had dismissed it as brotherly overprotectiveness. "You see everyone as a business opponent, Leo. He loves me, and I love him." Her love was genuine. She saw past the polished sterling veneer to a man she believed was simply trying to live up to the impossible expectations of his mother. Victoria Sterling was a woman carved from ice and ambition. She viewed emotion as a liability and affection as a currency to be dispensed sparingly and strategically. She approved of Isabella not as a daughter-in-law, but as a priceless asset. The pregnancy, which they had announced 3 months prior, had only increased Isabella's value in Victoria's cold calculus. A male heir would solidify the dynasty. The wedding preparations had been a military-grade operation orchestrated by Victoria. The venue was a historic Long Island estate, its sprawling lawns rolling down to the calm, grey waters of the Sound. The guest list was a who's who of global finance, European aristocracy, and Hollywood royalty. Every detail was curated to scream power. The champagne was vintage, the orchestra was from Vienna, and the 5-tier wedding cake was a confectionery marvel flown in from Paris. The week leading up to the ceremony had been a blur of contractual meetings disguised as family dinners. Lawyers outnumbered cousins. The talk was of stock options, board seats, and brand synergy. Richard, usually so attentive, had become distant, his phone a permanent fixture in his hand. He'd wave away her concerns with a dazzling smile. "Just last-minute merger madness, my love. The price of building our empire. After Saturday, it's just you, me, and the little one. I promise." He had a best man, Marcus Thorne, who was also a senior VP at Sterling Holdings. Marcus was slick and obsequious, always laughing a little too loudly at Richard's jokes, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Isabella found him unnerving. He had a way of looking at her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Resentment, perhaps, or a predatory hunger that was deeply unsettling. She'd mentioned it to Richard once, who had simply laughed it off. "Marcus, he's harmless, a bit of a suck-up, but he's been my right hand for years. Don't you worry your beautiful head about him." On the morning of the wedding, the bride's suite at the estate was a flurry of activity. Her mother, Sophia Rossi, a woman whose warmth was a direct contrast to Victoria's frost, was fussing with the lace on her veil. Her bridesmaids, a giggling trio of her oldest friends from university, were sipping champagne. But Isabella couldn't shake a deep, gnawing anxiety. She hadn't seen Richard that morning. He had stayed at a nearby hotel with Marcus, as per tradition, but he had promised to come to her suite for a private moment before the chaos began, just the two of them. He was an hour late. She'd called him twice. The first time it went straight to voicemail. The second time he'd answered his voice breathless and rushed. "Sorry, darling. Got held up. Marcus needed me for something. A little best man crisis. I'm on my way now. I love you." But there was a noise in the background, a faint feminine giggle. Before she could ask, he'd hung up. "Everything all right, Cara?" her mother asked, her gentle hands stilling on her shoulders. Isabella forced a smile. "Fine, Mama. Just nerves." But it wasn't nerves. It was a splinter of doubt lodged deep in her heart that was beginning to fester. She walked to the grand window of the suite, which overlooked the perfectly manicured gardens where hundreds of guests were already beginning to gather. She saw Victoria Sterling holding court near the grand floral arch, a triumphant queen surveying her kingdom. She saw Leo standing apart, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight as he stared toward the main house. Their child chose that moment to give a strong, decisive kick. Isabella placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise running through her. "I will protect you, always." The words were a vow, though she did not yet know the war she was about to declare. The drop of sweat completed its journey down her back, and the fairy tale began to curdle. The stage was set, the audience was waiting, but the leading man had gone off script, and Isabella was about to become the director of an entirely different kind of show. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each one taut with an unspoken tension that began to suffocate the joyous atmosphere of the bride's suite. The laughter of her bridesmaids became forced. The bubbles in their champagne seemed to die with a fizz of anxiety. Isabella's phone remained silent on the antique vanity, a sleek black mirror reflecting her perfectly made-up face, a mask of serene beauty that was beginning to crack at the edges. "He'll be here," her friend Jessica said, a little too brightly. "You know what grooms are like. Probably lost his cufflinks or something." But Isabella knew Richard. He was meticulously organized, a trait hammered into him by his mother. He didn't lose things. He didn't run late for appointments of this magnitude, not unless he was distracted. The wedding planner, a severe woman named Ms. Albright with a headset permanently attached to her ear, appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Ms. Rossi. Your father is waiting downstairs. The guests are seated." Her eyes darted around the room, noting the absence of the groom. A flicker of professional panic crossed her face before being ruthlessly suppressed. "He was supposed to be here," Isabella said, her voice quiet. "I'm sure he's on his way to the altar." Ms. Albright chirped, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Shall we?" Isabella took a deep breath, the boning of her custom-made gown feeling suddenly like a straitjacket. "I need a moment. Please. Just tell my father 2 more minutes." As soon as the door clicked shut, she looked at her brother's number and pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "Where is he, Leo?" she asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Leo's voice was grim. "I don't know. Marcus is out there by the archway, looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. He told me Richard was composing himself. Victoria is starting to look murderous, and not in her usual way." A new wave of nausea washed over her, this one having nothing to do with her pregnancy. "Leo, he called an hour ago. He said he was with Marcus. I heard a girl laugh." Silence on the other end of the line. When Leo finally spoke, all traces of forced calm were gone. His voice was cold steel. "Where are you, Bella?" "In the suite. They want me to start walking." "Don't move," he commanded. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming up. Something is wrong." The call ended. Isabella stood frozen in the middle of the opulent room. Her friends watched her, their earlier cheerfulness replaced by a shared silent dread. The scent of lilies was now overwhelming funereal. It was the scent of decay. She had to know. "I need some air," she announced, her voice surprisingly steady. She began walking toward the door, her heavy train whispering behind her. "Bella, wait," her mother cried out. "Your dress, you can't go out there." But Isabella didn't stop. She moved with a purpose that scattered her entourage like birds. She swept past Ms. Albright in the hallway, ignoring her frantic protests. She ignored the confused looks from caterers and staff. Her instincts were a roaring fire in her gut, guiding her steps, pulling her not towards the garden, not towards the ceremony, but in the opposite direction, down a secluded corridor, that led to the estate's private wing. The library, the billiards room, and a series of small private studies reserved for the estate's owners. It was a part of the house the guests were not meant to see. The air here was still and cool. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps. She passed the grand library, its doors firmly shut. She passed the billiards room. And then she saw it. At the end of the hall, the door to the smallest study, the one with the old mahogany desk and the view of the secluded woods, was slightly ajar. A sliver of light cut across the dark hallway, and from within she heard a sound that would be seared into her memory forever. It wasn't a giggle this time. It was a soft, breathy moan. Her blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her hand, clutching the bouquet of white peonies and roses, began to tremble violently. The baby inside her was still, as if sensing the impending shockwave. This was a dream, a nightmare. It had to be. In a moment, she would wake up in her bed, and Richard would be there, and this horrible, suffocating feeling would be gone. Then she heard his voice, low and husky, a voice she knew better than her own. "We don't have much time." He said his words punctuated by another soft, feminine sound. Anger, white hot and volcanic, erupted through the ice of her shock. It propelled her forward. Her trembling stopped. Her hand was steady. She didn't throw the door open. She pushed it slowly, silently. The scene that greeted her was a tableau of obscene betrayal. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss. It was far, far worse. Her Richard, was there, his perfectly tailored wedding tuxedo jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck, and his shirt was unbuttoned, revealing his chest. He was leaning against the large mahogany desk, and in his arms, her body pressed against his, was a woman. Isabella recognized her instantly. It was Scarlett Dubois, a junior analyst from Sterling Holdings, a pretty brunette with ambitious eyes whom Richard had once dismissed as eager but harmless. Scarlett's dress, a slinky emerald green number completely inappropriate for a morning wedding, was hiked up high on her thighs. Her hands were tangled in Richard's hair. Her lipstick, a garish shade of crimson, was smeared around her mouth. And on the desk, next to a half-empty glass of what looked like whiskey, sat Richard's phone. They hadn't seen her. They were lost in their sordid little world, just meters away from where their families, their friends, their entire world awaited their union. Isabella didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm washed over her. It was the calm of the eye of a hurricane, a pocket of absolute stillness before total devastation. She took one step into the room. The heel of her shoe clicked on the hardwood floor just inside the doorway. It was the only sound needed. Richard's head snapped up. His eyes widened first in confusion, then in pure, unadulterated horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pasty and sick. He shoved Scarlett away from him so abruptly that she stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Bella." He choked out his voice, a strangled whisper. It's not what it looks like." It was the oldest, most pathetic cliché in the book, and it was the spark that lit the fuse. Isabella looked from his panicked face to Scarlett's, who was now staring at her with a mixture of fear and defiance. She looked at his undone shirt, at the smeared lipstick, at the jacket, lying discarded like a promise he'd just thrown away. Then her gaze fell to the phone on the desk. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked away. "Bella, wait. Please." Richard's desperate cry followed her down the hall. She heard him scrambling, fumbling to fix his clothes to chase after her. But just as he reached the hallway, another figure appeared, blocking his path. It was Leo. His face was a mask of thunderous rage. He had seen her face as she emerged from the corridor, and he had understood everything in an instant. "You are not taking one more step toward my sister." Leo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He placed a firm hand on Richard's chest, stopping him cold. Isabella didn't look back. She kept walking her back straight, her head held high. She walked past the confused staff, past Ms. Albright, who was now babbling into her headset. She walked to the grand staircase where her father, a kind man with a gentle face, was waiting for her, his expression a mixture of pride and confusion. "Isabella, what's wrong? Where have you been?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She looked at her father, the man who had always protected her, and for the first time a single tear escaped and traced a path through her perfect makeup. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "The wedding is off," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the air. She didn't wait for his response. She lifted the microphone from the small podium that had been set up for the officiant. Her hand was rock steady. She walked past the stunned string quartet, past the floral arch, and stood before the hundreds of seated guests. The murmuring crowd fell silent, their faces a sea of confusion. They saw a bride impossibly beautiful standing alone at the altar. They expected a tearful announcement of a delay. They expected an apology. They got a revolution. The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. It was a heavy, breathless void, filled only by the distant cry of a seagull and the rustle of leaves in the sea breeze. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on Isabella, a solitary figure in white against a backdrop of obscene floral abundance. In the front row, Victoria Sterling's face had tightened into a mask of confused displeasure. She started to rise, a silent command for Isabella to step down, but a sharp look from Leo, who had now taken a position a few feet to his sister's right, froze her in place. Isabella's knuckles were white where she gripped the microphone. She could feel the baby, a tiny, innocent life, nestled safely inside her. That thought was her anchor. It was her strength. She wasn't just a jilted bride. She was a mother, protecting her child from a legacy of lies before it could even begin. She lifted the microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, did not tremble. It was clear, resonant, and carried the cold, hard weight of undeniable truth. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, deliberately avoiding Richard's family. "I want to thank you all for coming here today to celebrate what was meant to be a joyous occasion." A nervous titter went through the crowd. This was not the expected script. "I have a brief announcement to make," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "There will be no wedding today." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Phones previously tucked away out of politeness began to emerge from pockets and purses. Victoria Sterling was now fully on her feet, her face ashen, her eyes shooting daggers at Isabella. "The union between the Rossi and Sterling families, and by extension the merger between our companies, is hereby cancelled, effective immediately." This was no longer a personal drama. It was a corporate bombshell. Murmurs erupted into a low roar. Men in tailored suits began speaking urgently into their phones. The stock market wasn't open on a Saturday, but they knew the bloodbath that would ensue on Monday morning. "Bella, stop this!" Victoria's voice was a sharp, piercing shriek that cut through the noise. "You are hysterical. What is the meaning of this?" Isabella finally turned her eyes to Victoria. There was no fear in her gaze, only a chilling, profound pity. "You should ask your son Victoria," she said, her voice dropping yet still carrying across the amplified system. "You should ask him what he was doing just a few moments ago in the estate's private study." At that moment, Richard finally appeared at the edge of the garden, skidding to a halt on the manicured grass. He had managed to straighten his clothes, but his face was a wreck of sweat and panic. Marcus Thorne was beside him, whispering frantically in his ear. Scarlett was nowhere to be seen, having evidently made a swift and cowardly exit. "Bella! Don't do this!" Richard shouted, his voice cracking with desperation as he started to push his way through the stunned guests. "Let's talk about this in private." "In private?" Isabella laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. "You mean like you and your mistress were just minutes before you were supposed to pledge your life to me, to our child?" The word mistress hung in the air, an accusation so vulgar and direct, it shocked the refined crowd into another stunned silence. The word child was a second blow twisting the knife of betrayal. Everyone knew she was pregnant. The crime was now doubled a sin against both a wife and a mother. Her eyes found Richard in the crowd. He froze, his face a mess of guilt and terror. "I believe the woman's name is Scarlett Dubois," Isabella announced, her voice precise and unforgiving. "She's a junior analyst at Sterling Holdings. For those of you on the board, you might want to review your company's policies on fraternization, especially when it involves the CEO-to-be actively cheating on his pregnant fiancée during his own wedding." Every detail was a nail in the coffin. She wasn't just airing dirty laundry. She was meticulously documenting the crime for the whole world to see. She named the woman, her position, the company, the location, the timing. It was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Richard looked utterly broken, exposed. He looked to his mother for help, but Victoria was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He had not just embarrassed the family. He had single-handedly torpedoed her life's work, the merger in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. He had proven himself to be exactly what she feared most, a weak, foolish boy ruled by his basest impulses. Isabella's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her own family. Her father's face was a canvas of shock and dawning rage. Her mother was weeping silently. And Leo? Leo was looking at her with an expression of fierce, absolute pride. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I've got you." She turned back to the crowd. "I apologize for wasting your time," she said, her formal tone returning. "But I believe in transparency, and I will not begin a marriage, a family, or a business partnership based on a foundation of such profound disrespect and deceit." She placed the microphone carefully back on the stand. The silence was broken by the sound of her footsteps on the stone path as she walked back the way she came. It was the most powerful walk of her life. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. She moved with the grace and dignity of a queen abdicating a throne she had just discovered was made of filth. As she reached the archway, she unclasped the sterling diamond, the ridiculously large engagement ring Richard had given her. It felt cold and foreign on her finger. She held it out to Leo as he met her. "See that our lawyers get this back to them," she said, her voice a low murmur, "along with a bill for half of this catastrophe." Leo took the ring, his hand closing over it. "Consider it done." "What now?" "Now," Isabella said, taking her brother's arm and not looking back at the chaos erupting behind them. "We go home, and then we go to war." The fairy tale was over. The carefully constructed facade had been shattered into a million pieces. As the Rossi siblings disappeared into the house, leaving the Sterling Empire to implode in a garden of dying lilies, one thing was clear. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a drama that would make the cancelled wedding look like a minor skirmish in a much larger, more brutal conflict. The sleeping giant of the Rossi family had been awakened, and hell hath no fury like a billionaire heiress scorned. The drive from the Long Island estate back to Isabella's Manhattan penthouse was a study in surreal silence. Leo drove the black Maybach with a focused intensity, navigating the traffic as if it were a hostile battleground. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of the city, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The adrenaline of the confrontation had begun to fade, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache that settled in her bones. She wasn't crying. The betrayal felt too vast, too seismic for tears. It was a tectonic shift in the landscape of her life, and she was still surveying the wreckage. Her phone, which she'd left in the bridal suite, had been retrieved by Leo's security detail. When they finally entered the quiet, sun-drenched expanse of her penthouse overlooking Central Park, her head of security, a stoic ex-Mossad agent named Gabriel, handed it to her. "It hasn't stopped, Ms. Rosie," he said, his voice impassive. "We've identified 37 unique numbers from the Sterling family and their associates, and over 200 calls from blocked numbers we assume are media." "Turn it off," Leo commanded. "Bella doesn't need to hear from any of them." "No," Isabella said, her voice surprisingly firm. She took the phone. "I want to see the groveling." She powered it on. The device vibrated violently in her hand as a tsunami of notifications flooded the screen. Voicemails, text messages, missed calls. Most were from Richard. She clicked on the most recent voicemail, putting it on speaker. Richard's voice, thick with manufactured tears and genuine panic, filled the room. "Bella. My God. Bella, I am so sorry. You don't understand. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. She means nothing to me. It was Marcus. He kept pouring me drinks, saying I was nervous. Scarlett was just there. I don't even know how it happened. Please just talk to me. We can fix this. I love you. I love our baby. Don't throw this all away because of one moment of insanity." Isabella listened with a detached curiosity, as if studying a particularly loathsome insect under a microscope. "He blames Marcus. He blames the alcohol. He calls her meaningless. He hasn't taken one shred of responsibility." She observed, her voice clinical. She deleted the voicemail without a second thought. The next was from Victoria. Her tone was not apologetic. It was furious. "Isabella, you have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Whatever foolishness Richard engaged in it was a private matter. To detonate it publicly, to jeopardize a multi-billion-dollar merger out of pure emotional hysterics, is unforgivable. You have proven yourself to be exactly the kind of liability I feared. Call me back when you have decided to act like an adult and salvage this situation, not for Richard's sake, but for the sake of our shareholders." Leo let out a short, harsh laugh. "She's worried about the shareholders, of course. Her son humiliates you in the worst possible way, and her first thought is the stock price." "It's all she knows," Isabella said, deleting Victoria's message as well. She scrolled through the texts. Pathetic apologies from Richard. Demands from his father. Even a bizarrely threatening message from an unknown number that read, "You just made a very powerful enemy, you little bitch." She suspected it was Marcus Thorne. She tossed the phone onto the marble island in her kitchen. "Lawyers," she said to Leo. "Get our legal team on a conference call. I want the merger dissolution papers drafted by Monday. I want a press release from Rossi Lifestyle by noon tomorrow, stating our position clearly. I want our PR team to get ahead of this narrative. I am not the hysterical woman. I am the CEO who uncovered a fatal flaw in a potential partner's leadership and acted decisively to protect my company's interests." Leo was already on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "Done. I'm calling Marco, then Julia from P. What about the personal side?" "Personal side," Isabella repeated the words as if they were from a foreign language. "There is no personal side anymore. He made it business when he cheated with a company employee. He made it business when he risked our family's name. Victoria made it business when she called me a liability to." The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated strategic warfare. While the Sterlings were in panicked damage control, fielding calls from irate board members and trying to spin a narrative of a troubled emotional bride, the Rossi team launched a surgical PR strike. Their press release was a masterpiece of corporate speak, framing the cancelled wedding and merger as a fundamental divergence in corporate ethics and leadership values discovered at a critical juncture. It never mentioned cheating, but the implication was clear. They were the stable, honorable party, extricating themselves from a toxic partner. The media, smelling blood, went into a frenzy. Paparazzi camped outside Isabella's building and the Sterling Holdings headquarters. Gossip sites published grainy photos of Scarlett Dubois fleeing the wedding venue, her face hidden in shame. Her identity, her job, her social media profiles, everything was dug up and put on public display. She became the digital Scarlet woman torn apart by an anonymous online mob. Isabella felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Scarlett's defiant smirk in that study. Meanwhile, Leo was dismantling the financial ties that had already begun to bind the two companies. He was ruthless. Joint accounts were frozen. Preliminary integration budgets were clawed back. A penalty clause in the initial merger agreement, one Leo himself had insisted upon covering, breaches of good faith and personal conduct by key principals was invoked. It would cost Sterling Holdings hundreds of millions of dollars. Isabella spent most of her time in her penthouse, a gilded fortress against the storm outside. Her mother Sophia had arrived, bringing with her the scent of home-cooked food and unconditional love. She didn't offer advice or judgment. She simply sat with Isabella, held her hand, and let her be silent when she needed silence and rage when she needed to rage. The rage came on the third day. Isabella was standing in the nursery she had so lovingly designed. It was a serene space of soft creams and gentle greys, with a hand-painted mural of a whimsical forest on one wall. A tiny crib stood assembled in the corner. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, and suddenly the full weight of her loss crashed down on her. It wasn't just the loss of a husband, but the loss of a dream of the family she thought she was building for her child. She let out a guttural sob, a sound of pure animal pain. And then she began to dismantle the room. She didn't break anything. Her actions were deliberate, methodical. She folded the tiny clothes and placed them back in their boxes. She took down the mobile of soft, felted stars. She pushed the crib against the wall. She was erasing Richard, erasing the future they were supposed to have, clearing the space for a new one she would have to build alone. Later that evening, Leo came to her apartment. He found her in the now barren nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the blank space where the crib had been. "The market's open today," he said, softly, leaning against the doorframe. Isabella didn't turn. How bad was it? Worse than we thought. For them, Leo clarified. Sterling Holdings dropped 17% at the opening bell. The financial press is calling it the Sterling implosion. Our stock, on the other hand, is up 3%. The narrative is holding we're seen as the strong, stable ones who dodged a bullet. A grim satisfaction settled over her. Good. There's more, Leo said, his tone shifting. Something's not right. The penalty clause I invoked. Sterling's lawyers are fighting it, which is expected. But their arguments are weak, almost distracted. And I've been looking at some of the preliminary financial data we shared during the due diligence phase. There are anomalies. This caught Isabella's attention. She turned to look at her brother. What kind of anomalies? Small things. Discrepancies in growth projections for certain offshore assets. A few encrypted data packets that our tech team flagged as unusual during the transfer. At the time, we chalked it up to Sterling's sloppy data management. But now, I don't know. It feels different. He walked further into the room. Think about it, Bella. The affair was stupid. It was arrogant. But the timing, on the morning of the wedding at the venue itself, it's almost too perfect, too self-destructive. Richard is weak and entitled, but is he suicidal? A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through Isabella's grief. Leo was right. The sheer brazen stupidity of Richard's actions was hard to reconcile. It was a level of recklessness that bordered on the theatrical. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting," Leo said, his eyes narrowing, "that maybe the affair wasn't the main event. Maybe it was a distraction, a smokescreen designed to cause exactly this kind of chaos. The question is, what was it meant to hide? The world, which had just been shattered, shifted again. Isabella had thought she was at the center of a drama about love and betrayal, but the cold dread creeping into her heart suggested she had been a pawn in an entirely different game. One with stakes that might be far higher than a broken heart and a cancelled wedding. The unraveling, she realized, had only just begun. The seed of doubt Leo had planted grew into a thicket of suspicion in Isabella's mind. For the next 2 weeks, while the world feasted on the scraps of her personal drama, she and her brother initiated a covert operation. They assembled a small, trusted team, Marco, their head of legal, Julia, their PR chief, a forensic accountant named Anya Sharma, who had a reputation for finding needles in digital haystacks, and Gabriel, their head of security, who was tasked with digging into the lives of Richard Marcus Thorne and Scarlett Dubois. Isabella worked from her penthouse, which had been transformed into a war room. The large dining table was covered in laptops, financial reports, and timelines. The grief was still there, a constant, dull ache, but it was now overlaid with a cold, energizing fury. She had been played. Her pain, her humiliation, her child's future, it had all been collateral damage in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Now she wanted to know the rules, and she wanted to burn the whole game board to the ground. Anya Sharma struck first. "The anomalies Leo flagged are real," she announced during a late-night conference call, her voice crisp and excited. "During the due diligence data transfer, Sterling Holdings sent us several large encrypted archive files containing their projections and asset valuations. Standard procedure. But buried within 3 of those archives were ghost protocols, essentially hidden programs that ran in the background while our servers were analyzing the data." "What did the programs do?" Isabella asked, leaning forward, her coffee forgotten. "They didn't steal anything," Anya said. "That would have triggered alarms. They did something much smarter. They made micro-alterations to our own predictive models. tiny insignificant changes to algorithm variables that over time would have skewed our valuation of their assets, specifically their new tech and derivatives divisions, making them appear more stable and profitable than they actually were. Leo swore softly in Italian. So they weren't just showing us fake numbers. They were hacking us to make us believe their fake numbers were our own idea. Exactly, Anya confirmed. It's brilliant and terrifyingly subtle. The financial discrepancy would have been a rounding error at first, but post-merger it would have become a black hole. Sterling Rossi Global would have been carrying billions in toxic, overvalued assets from their side of the ledger. Within a year or two, it would have triggered a catastrophic devaluation. A corporate Trojan horse, Isabella whispered, the pieces beginning to click into place. Victoria would never sanction that. She's ruthless, but she's not stupid. A collapse like that would destroy the Sterling name forever. Which means someone else at Sterling Holdings was running this play. Leo concluded, his voice grim. Someone who stood to gain from the chaos. The spotlight fell squarely on two people, Richard and Marcus Thorne. At the same time, Gabriel's report landed on Isabella's desk. It was a deep dive into the lives of her ex-fiancé and his best man. Richard's profile was predictable, a history of lavish spending, a string of short-term relationships with models and actresses, and a deep-seated psychological need for his mother's approval. But Marcus Thorne's profile was far more interesting. On the surface, he was the loyal number 2. But Gabriel's team had dug deeper. Marcus came from a family that had been rivals with the Sterlings 2 generations ago, before his own family's fortune had collapsed. He had joined Sterling Holdings with a chip on his shoulder, working his way up while living in Richard's shadow. Gabriel had also uncovered a series of encrypted communications and offshore bank transfers. Marcus was living far beyond his declared salary, and the money trail led to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The final piece of the puzzle was Scarlett Dubois. Gabriel's team found that she wasn't just a random ambitious analyst. Her university tuition had been paid for by an anonymous scholarship fund. A fund that Gabriel, through painstaking digital forensics, traced back to the same Cayman Islands holding company that was financing Marcus Thorne. He's been cultivating her for years, Isabella breathed, staring at the interconnected lines she had drawn on a whiteboard. She was his asset. He placed her inside the company, probably instructed her to get close to Richard, knowing Richard's weakness for a pretty face and a bit of ego stroking. It's a classic intelligence operation, Gabriel stated. Thorne is the handler, Dubois is the honey trap. The full horrifying picture began to emerge. This was Marcus Thorne's endgame. He wasn't Richard's friend. He was his nemesis, playing a long, patient game of revenge and ambition. So here's the play, Leo said, pacing the room, piecing it together. Marcus plants the Trojan horse in the merger data. He knows it will eventually cripple the new company, but that's not enough. He wants to take over. He needs to discredit the Sterling leadership, namely Richard, and cause a crisis that sends the stock price plummeting. The affair, Isabella finished, her voice laced with ice. It was the perfect catalyst. He goads Richard, who is already a willing fool, into a situation he knows Richard can't resist. He makes sure it happens at the most public, most damaging time possible. He wanted me to find them. He wanted the public explosion. It wasn't just about stopping the merger. It was about cratering Sterling Holdings' value. So he could trigger a hostile takeover, Anya added. With the stock in freefall, the company would be vulnerable. He and his backers, whoever is behind that Cayman account, could swoop in and buy up a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. He gets his revenge on the Sterlings. He gets the company, and he gets to be the hero who rescues it from the ashes. Leo summarized, shaking his head in disbelief at the sheer Machiavellian audacity of the plan. It was all there. The cheating scandal wasn't the story. It was the cover. Isabella's public humiliation had been a meticulously planned strategic move in a corporate coup. The realization didn't lessen her pain, but it transformed it. The grief of a victim was replaced by the cold, calculating rage of a queen who had been used as a pawn in a commoner's coup. "Richard," Isabella said the name, testing it. "Where does he fit? Is he a total idiot, or was he a willing participant?" "I think he's a fool, not a conspirator," Leo reasoned. "Marcus likely sold him a different story. Sow some wild oats before you settle down. Have one last fling." He played on Richard's ego and insecurities. Richard thought he was just being a playboy. He had no idea he was the sacrificial lamb. Isabella stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. They seemed sharper now, colder. She had been betrayed on a level she could scarcely comprehend. Her heart had been broken to create a market opportunity. "They underestimated me," she said, softly, her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass. "They all did. Richard thought I was just a prize. Victoria thought I was an asset. And Marcus thought I was a hysterical woman who would just cry and cancel a wedding." She turned back to the room, her eyes burning with a new fire. "He's right about one thing. I did cancel the wedding. Now I'm going to cancel his entire future." She looked at Leo, at Anya, at Gabriel. "We have the proof of the financial fraud. We have the connection between Marcus and Scarlett. We have the motive. It's time to stop playing defense. It's time to show them what a Rossi does when you threaten our family and our house." The serpent had played his game, but he had made a fatal error. He had attacked the lioness in her own den, and he had forgotten that she had claws of her own. The war for Sterling Holdings was about to enter a new bloody chapter, and Isabella Rossi, the scorned bride, was about to become its unlikely conqueror. Isabella did not move with the speed of a woman seeking vengeance. She moved with the cold, deliberate precision of a master chess player setting up a checkmate. For a week, she did nothing, letting the public narrative solidify. Sterling Holdings continued its slow-motion collapse. The stock had stabilized, but was still down almost 30% from its pre-wedding value. Board members were in open revolt, and Victoria Sterling was fighting a losing battle to maintain control her every move, hampered by the public disgrace of her son. Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, was playing his part perfectly. He was the picture of loyalty, publicly defending the Sterling family, while privately telling key investors and board members that Richard was an unstable liability, and Victoria had lost her touch. He was positioning himself as the only viable successor, the steady hand needed to guide the company through the storm he had created. The first move of Isabella's counterattack was silent and devastating. Through a neutral third-party law firm based in Geneva, Leo, acting on Isabella's instructions, forwarded Anya Sharma's entire forensic report on the Trojan Horse data breach to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. The report was submitted anonymously, flagged as a whistleblower complaint originating from within Sterling Holdings itself. It detailed the attempted fraud, the ghost protocols, and the potential for massive shareholder deception without once mentioning the Rossi family. 2 days later, federal agents walked into the Sterling Holdings headquarters in Midtown with a warrant. They seized servers, computers, and files. The raid made national news, sending a fresh shockwave of panic through the investment community. The stock, which had been limping, now nosedived into a catastrophic freefall. The narrative was no longer about a cheating fiancé. It was about systemic, high-level corporate fraud. Victoria and Richard were blindsided. They had been so focused on the personal scandal that they had no idea a financial guillotine was hanging over their heads. Isabella's second move was targeted at Marcus Thorne himself. While the federal investigation paralyzed the company, Gabriel delivered a dossier to her. It contained irrefutable proof of the offshore account, the payments to Scarlett Dubois, and the crown jewel, a secretly recorded audio file. Gabriel's team had managed to recover a conversation between Marcus and one of his co-conspirators, a disgruntled board member from a cloud backup. In the recording, Marcus laid out his entire plan. The sabotage of the merger, the use of the affair to spook the filly, his disgusting term for Isabella, and his strategy to trigger a hostile takeover using funds from their Cayman Islands entity. Isabella didn't leak the audio. That would be too simple, too chaotic. She decided to deliver the blow herself. She requested a meeting with the Sterling Holdings Board of Directors. The request, coming from the woman at the center of their company's downfall, was met with stunned confusion. But her family was still a major player in the global market, and refusing her would look weak. They agreed, holding the meeting in their cavernous, wood-paneled boardroom, the very heart of the Sterling Empire. Isabella walked into that room, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. She was dressed in a sharply tailored crimson suit, the color of power and blood. She was visibly pregnant, a silent testament to the personal cost of the drama, but her demeanor was pure steel. Leo was by her side, his presence a silent warning. Victoria, Richard, and the entire board, including a smug-looking Marcus Thorne, were seated around the massive table. Victoria's face was a mask of cold fury. Richard couldn't even look at her. He stared at the table, a broken man. "Thank you for seeing me." Isabella began, her voice calm and clear, filling the tense silence. "I know my presence here is unexpected. I am not here to relitigate the personal events of the past few weeks. I am here to talk about the future of this company." "You have no right to be here," Victoria snapped. "You have done enough damage." "On the contrary," Isabella replied, her eyes locking with Victoria's. "I am here because I am the only person in this room who knows the full truth of why your company is burning to the ground. And it has very little to do with my cancelled wedding." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose smug expression was beginning to falter, replaced by a flicker of alarm. "For weeks you have all been operating under the assumption that this crisis was caused by a personal indiscretion. You are wrong. The affair was merely a tool, a brightly colored flag waved to distract the bull while the matador prepared the killing blow." She nodded to Leo, who placed a small, sleek speaker on the center of the table. "I believe you all know Marcus Thorne," Isabella said, her voice dropping. "You see him as Richard's loyal right hand, the future of this company, perhaps. But I'd like to introduce you to the real Marcus Thorne." She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the boardroom, arrogant and chillingly clear. "The beauty of it is the simplicity. We let pretty boy Richard hang himself with his own zipper. The girl Scarlett played her part perfectly. The pregnant fiancés, the filly spooks, just like I said she would. She cancels everything, makes a big dramatic scene. The stock tanks on the personal drama. Then while they're all running around putting out that fire, the feds get the anonymous tip about the merger data. By the time they figure out what's really going on, we've already bought up 30% of the stock from the Caymans. We rescue the company. I take the throne. The Sterlings are history." The silence that followed the recording was heavier than a tombstone. Every eye in the room turned to Marcus Thorne. His face was the color of ash. He half rose from his chair, sputtering, trying to form a denial, but no words came. He was utterly, completely exposed. Victoria Sterling looked as if she had been turned to stone. The betrayal from her son was one thing, but this was a viper she had nurtured in her own nest, a man who had plotted the utter destruction of her life's work, while smiling to her face. Isabella pressed a second button, and an email was sent simultaneously to everyone in the room. That is the audio file. You will also now have a full dossier detailing Mr. Thorne's offshore accounts, his conspiracy with certain members of this board, and his long-term cultivation of Scarlett Dubois as a corporate espionage asset. I have taken the liberty of forwarding this entire package to the lead investigator at the SEC. I believe they will find it very illuminating. Marcus Thorne sank back into his chair. A dead man walking. His career was over. His freedom was next. Isabella finally allowed her gaze to fall upon Richard. He was staring at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea for a forgiveness he would never receive. He finally understood that he had not been a player, but a pawn. He had lost everything: his fiancée, his child, his company, his family's respect. Not for a passionate mistake, but as a calculated move in someone else's game. It was a truth more damning than any affair. As of this morning, Isabella announced, her voice ringing with finality, Rossi Lifestyle, through a subsidiary investment fund, has acquired a 28% stake in Sterling Holdings, purchased on the open market at its current distressed value. We are now the single largest shareholder. She let that bombshell settle. She owned them. We will be calling for an emergency shareholder meeting to remove the current board and install new leadership. My brother Leo Rossi will act as interim chairman. We will cooperate fully with the federal investigation. We will rebuild this company based on the Rossi values: integrity, transparency, and strength. She stood up. Her point made her victory absolute. She had not just weathered the storm. She had harnessed its power and used it to conquer her enemies. She walked toward the door, pausing only when she was level with Richard. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with a final dismissive indifference. "You were right about one thing, Richard," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was a meaningless mistake. You are a meaningless man." With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the Sterling dynasty. She stepped out into the bright Manhattan sunshine, took a deep breath of the free air, and placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked a steady, strong rhythm. It was a new world, a new future. One she had secured not as a bride, but as a warrior. A queen who had faced down betrayal and built an empire from the ashes. And so the fairy tale wedding ended not with a kiss, but with a hostile takeover. Isabella Rossi walked away from the wreckage, not as a heartbroken victim, but as a triumphant queen who had turned the deepest betrayal of her life into her greatest victory. She proved that the strongest empires aren't built on contracts and mergers, but on unbreakable integrity and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman determined to protect her own. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating endings are merely the foundation for glorious new beginnings. What would you have done in Isabella's shoes? Could you find the strength to not only walk away, but to fight back and win? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, justice, and ultimate empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.